Mercy returns next Wednesday with an all-new episode and a new cast member.
We know who really runs Mercy Hospital.
Veronica Agnes Callahan.
Funny story, I'm the new chief of the ICU.
Oh, let the dance begin.
We just need to give this boy a fighting chance.
Well, I'm sorry. If I may, I'd like to offer a solution.
Thank you. You set me up in there.
We're like Fred and Ginger. If Ginger was an angry, bitter nurse.
James Van Der Beek joins the cast as a royal pain in there.
They just got interesting.
New Mercy, next Wednesday, 8/7 Central on NBC.
From NBC News, the State of the Union Address. Live from Washington, here is Brian Williams.
Good evening from Capitol Hill. It is the third time he has spoken to a joint session of Congress, but it is the first time as president that Barack Obama has delivered the State of the Union Address. It is safe to say it is a different speech than the one he might have delivered a week or so ago before a Republican won special election to the seat held by Ted Kennedy in Massachusetts for almost half a century. Outside of Washington, in America, the voters are angry, and the president knows it. There is some fury over bailouts and big bankers and big bonuses and no jobs. Tonight, at the end of his first year in office, he gets to sum up the job and look at the future. As you can see, the chamber is already filling as members of the cabinet and White House staff file in. The First Lady, Michelle Obama, is greeting her guests in the First Lady's box in the gallery. For our coverage, David Gregory and Andrea Mitchell are here with me in the studio. Chuck Todd across town in our NBC News Washington newsroom. And Kelly O'Donnell, among others, in our reporting staff, is in the well of the House and the chamber itself tonight. She'll be reporting from there. Earlier today, the White House pretty much put on a full-court press, briefing small groups of journalists on their message thus far and their aims going into tonight. Among the gatherings, lunch, several of us attended with the president. David Gregory, moderator of Meet the Press, was among the guests. David, how would you sum up what you saw and heard today, his state of mind heading into this speech tonight?
Brian, my takeaway was that the president felt in some ways that Washington has become a trap for him, as it does for a lot of presidents. He wants tonight to reconnect to that change agent that he was on the campaign trail and begin to make the changes that he promised to make, but also to try to persuade Americans who don't have a lot of faith in government right now, who are losing confidence in his ability to solve problems, that he can turn things around. And he's doing this with a huge overhang of 10% unemployment, as you just mentioned. And he's got a very tall order. He's going to be looking at this chamber, a divided Congress, a Republican opposition that's unified, and a public that is increasingly skeptical.
A lot of people look at the presidency as a checkbook that you are handed upon election, and you can draw down your balance of political capital if you do it right and if the times correspond, as you wish, some of it on your schedule. And I know the president is believed to have been lamenting lately about how much he had to use in the first year in office. Part of it was handed to him, the economic collapse, which of course started under the last president but has been hung squarely around his neck. Another part is the elective part of the presidency, and that is the fight over health care that looms over this chamber tonight.
There were things that he had to do coming into office, and there were things that he chose to do. And by his own admission, in choosing to take on health care, he took on a lot. He knew how tough it would be. He told his advisors that he knew he'd drive down his poll numbers. Well, all of that has come to pass and more. He missed deadlines this past summer. It dragged on. And now here we are, State of the Union time. This is not done and looks more precarious, Brian, than ever. There is no path that the White House knows about right now to get the bill passed. I think tonight you'll hear him talk about that, talk about the stakes, and talk about some pragmatic steps to begin to draw in Republicans who have been united in their opposition to health care all along. But he's drawn down that political capital on health care. And by his own admission, it's going to take some time to build that up. And I think this is the beginning of that process in his mind.
Andrea, I was just seeing the Joint Chiefs there assembled in very, very good seats down front. The area of defense, homeland security is among those off limits to the spending cuts the president just announced. Again, a new initiative to kind of counter and face an angry public as we watch the door carefully.
This is the way the president is trying to reconnect with the American people, with the angry public out there by displaying himself tonight as a fighter on behalf of middle-class values, the middle-class American, the hard-working, decent Americans who keep on fighting and keep on despite all of the adversity. And he's going to portray himself as someone who is in their corner and cutting government spending, because he is now tonight campaigning as much against Washington as someone on the outside looking in. He is saying that it's time, as we watch the doorway there, we see the president about to walk in.
Madam Speaker. You're throwing up on Greg.
It's a matter of camera crews between the Sergeant-at-Arms and the gaze of the Speaker of the House and Vice President. Here we go.
Madam Speaker!
The President of the United States!
President behind him, trailing the leadership. Steny Hoyer there on the left to the state of Maryland, and Majority Leader Reid in the Senate. Andrea, a lot of the pressure of things like health care. Of course, health care controversial because the White House said, here you go, you can start this process, work it out. Burden comes right back down to the Capitol.
It comes back down to the Capitol, and Speaker Pelosi floated today one possible avenue, a very big stretch, but taking individual components, passing them in the Senate first, then in the House, by 51 votes. Those that are fiscal measures can be done through this budget process that they call, with a fancy word, reconciliation. They can't do any of the non-tax or fiscal measures that way, and then dealing with the larger issue of health care down the road. But the White House, frankly, wants to de-emphasize health care tonight. We're told that 2/3 of this speech will be about jobs, 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 jobs in the economy. There you see the First Lady's box. And as the president works his way through all of the members who have positioned, and there's Eliot Engel from New York.
State of New York.
Stake that out. He told Savannah Guthrie and Chuck Todd this morning on MSNBC, he told them he'd stake that out at 8 o'clock this morning, put down his tape and mark that spot. And Sheila Jackson-Lee right behind him. They want to be on that aisle, whether they love the president or not. Even with George W. Bush, a Republican, those Democrats wanted to be seen.
A lot of exposure. Kelly O'Donnell, as I mentioned, has live broadcast capability down in the House chamber. Kelly, describe what you can see from where you are as the president gives an embrace to his Treasury Secretary, who walked right into a buzzsaw at a hearing today.
Yes, Mr. Geithner definitely had a tough day, Brian. The reception here is chilly, and I mean that in the literal sense, not the political. At about noon today, they turned down the temperature in this chamber, so much so that there have been members who have been using their coats like blankets in order to make this evening a little bit more comfortable when the room was full. So as you saw, those members who were so carefully positioned, having staked out their spaces, many of them had been wrapped in blankets and coats to hold those spots. We also know that Joe Wilson, do you remember that name from the last time we were all together at a night like this? He has a better seat than he had last time, but we have been told that he and all of the other members of the Republican delegation were reminded to be courteous. Joe Wilson, the Republican of South Carolina, who had shouted out during the president's remarks back in the fall, we don't expect a repeat of that. Also, one of the things that has really stood out, I spoke with a senior advisor who said that before the president walked in the room tonight, and you noted that pause when you were describing the cameras waiting, that they give Mr. Obama a moment of quiet. They step away from him so he can just take a moment before he enters this chamber to deliver what is certainly an extraordinary speech in his career. Brian?
White House staff members have been pointing out that as of tonight, the same time in the Reagan presidency, Ronald Reagan's popularity was several points below where this president enters the chamber tonight. The American people uniformly still give him high marks, up in the 60s, for his leadership skills. A lot of voters still content with the vote that they cast, but nonetheless angry at certain aspects of management, and especially the economy. They tell us unemployment's at 10%. Anyone in America knows the actual number is so much higher when you factor in real life. Copies of the speech being handed by the president back to the Speaker of the House and the Vice President. Now we begin that next round of planned but spontaneous applause.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
Nothing like spontaneous applause. And David, the President seems absolutely keenly aware of the press coverage and where he differs, where he wants to point out that reality differs from what he's reading.
He's also, aides have pointed out, not.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please. Madam Speaker, Vice President Biden, members of Congress, distinguished guests, and fellow Americans. Our Constitution declares that from time to time, the President shall give to Congress information about the state of our Union. For 220 years, our leaders have fulfilled this duty. They've done so during periods of prosperity and tranquility. And they've done so in the midst of war and depression, in moments of great strife and great struggle. It's tempting to look back on these moments and assume that our progress was inevitable, that America was always destined to succeed. But when the Union was turned back at Bull Run and the Allies first landed at Omaha Beach, victory was very much in doubt. When the market crashed on Black Tuesday and civil rights marchers were beaten on Bloody Sunday, the future was anything but certain. These were the times that tested the courage of our convictions and the strength of our Union. And despite all our divisions and disagreements, our hesitations and our fears, America prevailed because we chose to move forward as one nation, as one people. Again, we are tested. And again, we must answer history's call. 1 year ago, I took office amid 2 wars, an economy rocked by a severe recession, a financial system on the verge of collapse, and a government deeply in debt. Experts from across the political spectrum warned that if we did not act, we might face a second depression. So we acted, immediately and aggressively. And 1 year later, the worst of the storm has passed. But the devastation remains. 1 in 10 Americans still cannot find work. Many businesses have shuttered. Home values have declined. Small towns and rural communities have been hit especially hard. And for those who'd already known poverty, life's become that much harder. And this recession has also compounded the burdens that America's families have been dealing with for decades. The burden of working harder and longer for less, of being unable to save enough to retire or help kids with college. So I know the anxieties that are out there right now. They're not new. These struggles are the reason I ran for president. These struggles are what I've witnessed for years in places like Elkhart, Indiana, Galesburg, Illinois. I hear about them in the letters that I read each night. The toughest to read are those written by children, asking why they have to move from their home, asking when their mom or dad will be able to go back to work. For these Americans and so many others, change has not come fast enough. Some are frustrated, some are angry. They don't understand why it seems like bad behavior on Wall Street is rewarded, but hard work on Main Street isn't. Or why Washington has been unable or unwilling to solve any of our problems. They're tired of the partisanship and the shouting and the pettiness. They know we can't afford it. Not now. So we face big and difficult challenges. And what the American people hope, what they deserve, is for all of us, Democrats and Republicans, to work through our differences, to overcome the numbing weight of our politics. For while the people who sent us here have different backgrounds, different stories, different beliefs, the anxieties they face are the same. The aspirations they hold are shared. A job that pays the bills, a chance to get ahead, most of all, the ability to give their children a better life. And you know what else they share? They share a stubborn resilience in the face of adversity. After one of the most difficult years in our history, they remain busy building cars and teaching kids, starting businesses and going back to school. They're coaching Little League and helping their neighbors. One woman wrote to me and said, "We are strained but hopeful, struggling but encouraged." It's because of this spirit, this great decency and great strength, that I have never been more hopeful about America's future than I am tonight. Despite our hardships, our union is strong. We do not give up. We do not quit. We do not allow fear or division to break our spirit. In this new decade, it's time the American people get a government that matches their decency, that embodies their strength. And tonight I'd like to talk about how together we can deliver on that promise. It begins with our economy. Our most urgent task upon taking office was to shore up the same banks that helped cause this crisis. It was not easy to do. And if there's one thing that has unified Democrats and Republicans and everybody in between, it's that we all hated the bank bailout. I hated it. I hated it. I hated it. You hated it. It was about as popular as a root canal. But when I ran for president, I promised I wouldn't just do what was popular. I would do what was necessary. And if we had allowed the meltdown of the financial system, unemployment might be double what it is today. More businesses would certainly have closed. More homes would have surely been lost. So I supported the last administration's efforts to create the Financial Rescue Program. And when we took that program over, we made it more transparent and more accountable. And as a result, the markets are now stabilized, and we've recovered most of the money we spent on the banks. Most, but not all. To recover the rest, I've proposed a fee on the biggest banks. Now, I know Wall Street isn't keen on this idea, but if these firms can afford to hand out big bonuses again, they can afford a modest fee to pay back the taxpayers who rescued them in their time of need. Now, as we stabilized the financial system, we also took steps to get our economy growing again, save as many jobs as possible, and help Americans who'd become unemployed. That's why we extended or increased unemployment benefits for more than 18 million Americans, made health insurance 65% cheaper for families who get their coverage through COBRA, and passed 25 different tax cuts. Now, let me repeat. We cut taxes. We cut taxes for 95% of working families. To close that credibility gap, we have to take action on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, to end the outsized influence of lobbyists, to do our work openly, to give our people the government they deserve. Now, that's what I came to Washington to do. That's why, for the first time in history, my administration posts on our White House visitors online. That's why we've excluded lobbyists from policymaking jobs or seats on federal boards and commissions. But we can't stop there. It's time to require lobbyists to disclose each contact they make on behalf of a client with my administration or with Congress. It's time to put strict limits on the contributions that lobbyists give, and God bless the United States of America.
The President brought the chamber to silence at the end there, the last few paragraphs before coming to a rousing end, and the President and his party will prepare to leave the chamber. A polite response here at the end, again, as is traditional. You saw it break down party lines. I want to go inside the chamber first to Kelly O'Donnell, because, Kelly, between all of us on this on-air team, I reckon we've covered cumulatively about 100 of these, and it was more boisterous inside that chamber at times, almost sarcastic, the amount of comments and catcalls after various points the President made. I'm wondering how striking it was to you in your position there.
Well, Brian, I was struck by both of what you're describing and also times where you might have expected a reaction and the President did not get one. What seemed to stand out here is the sort of boisterousness you're referring to was the type that was very diffuse. You could not hear specific words. I never heard a boo uttered. There were certainly laughs that might have been interpreted as sarcastic, and moments when the President certainly seemed prepared tonight to take on someone in the audience should they raise their voices above the din. And as you could see, he ad-libbed a few times when he got a reaction that perhaps he did not expect. I certainly noticed that there was enormous enthusiasm among House Democrats, who seemed particularly free to jump out of their seats with a bit more enthusiasm. I noticed among Republicans, and I watched very carefully, that they would whisper to each other, but there was not as much standing up. It appeared to be no prepared pieces of literature passed among them. The last time we were here, they did have talking points that they were holding. That did not seem to be the case. I saw far fewer Blackberries. It did not seem that people were twittering during this event, and we have seen that in past times. So I think there were moments when the President expected a louder reaction, maybe did not get it. It took, I think, 3 pages of text before there were applause. And I think there was a sense, certainly among Republicans, that if there was to be a reaction, that it be of a diffuse nature and not anything that could be detected as a specific word or phrase uttered directly at the President. Brian?
Kelly O'Donnell on the floor of the House chamber. At times here in the studio, we were saying it sounded more like question time in Great Britain, David Gregory, than it does a traditional State of the Union. And it really was, as speeches go, a long journey. It was at times combative and very direct.
It was, and for a president who's fought off this image of being wonkish and disconnected emotionally, he had a couple of flashes of sarcasm, humor, passion at times, some anger and irritation when he looked to his Republican colleagues and said that's how budgeting works, that you don't actually implement it to the following year. And I think it was interesting, Brian, substantively you saw a president who was taking a more pragmatic approach to the Republican side, saying, let's do some things that you can support, at the same time calling out Republicans to say, if you want to make it that a supermajority is the only way to get legislation passed, then you're on the hook here too. You are responsible for legislating. It's the foundation of an argument I think you'll hear Democrats make as the year goes on, which is to say you can't simply oppose and get away with it.
Our chief White House correspondent, political director Chuck Todd, has been watching along with us. Chuck, match delivery against expectations at the White House. As we noted, this speech was altered a bit in light of voter anger as represented by the surprise out of Massachusetts a week ago.
Boy, it sure was. When you think about it, Brian, he spent more time talking about sort of the angst about Washington not working, sort of his own frustration about the political process, even singling out the media as well for how they treat sometimes policy debates. Frankly, they are frustrations you and I have both heard the president make privately, and he aired them very publicly here about the whole process. So it very much felt somewhat reactive to what our polls show is an angry electorate, an angry and anxious electorate. I was struck by a couple things. Number one, this speech was clearly aimed at the middle of this country, the independents. He threw a lot out there to Republicans, a lot of pet issues, whether it was building new nuclear power plants or talking about offshore oil drilling, a lot there that Republicans should be able to support individually. It'll be interesting to see if congressional Republicans do. You almost wonder, picking up on David's point, as if this is a dare. The White House is almost daring the Republicans to go against them on some of these things.
Chuck Todd with analysis immediately following this speech. We're going to start the run-up to the GOP response. We're going to fit in a commercial break here. When we come back, a little more about the man we'll be hearing from tonight, responding for the Republican Party, a politician who has been on the job, his current job, for all of 11 days.